This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control, which is currently introducing its new base membership. What is base membership? Well, it's the AAOMC's new free introductory membership type, designed to help educate doctors on myopia control and orthokeratology. Whether you are brand new, an experienced fitter searching for pearls, or someone who's dabbled in the past and ready to step up their game, AAOMC base membership can help, and it's free. So what do you have to lose? Go to orthokeratologist.com, click on the practitioner button, and join us. Join the war against the myopia epidemic. Welcome to The Corrected View, a podcast about myopia control and the people devoted to its role in specialty care. I'm your host, Matthew Herzberg, the Executive Director of the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. In each episode of this podcast, we discuss news, education, and important topics in and around Ortho-k and myopia control. But this isn't a podcast where it's my opinions about myopia control that are the ones that count, but instead, yours. The clinicians, academics, students, and industry experts that make up our overall larger community. So if you have something to add to the discussion, join us in the AAOMC Facebook group or email the podcast at thecorrectedview@gmail.com. In the episode I have for you today, we have a very special guest in Ken Mahler, who is most notably one of the top gurus when it comes to Wave, the Ortho-k design software. Ken joins Paul Levine and I to talk about his experiences using the Oculus Pentacam, specifically for Ortho-k, and how it's changed the way he practices. Aside from being a great discussion, there are some truly revelatory moments of this interview in which Ken shares his wisdom and philosophy for being a great orthokeratologist. But before we get to the episode, I wanted to take a quick moment to ask for your support. The American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control is in the midst of a fundraising campaign after the pandemic forced us to cancel our annual education meeting, Vision by Design 2020. Due to the financial obligations and refunds from Vision by Design, the AAOMC has a huge financial hole we now need to pull ourselves out of. This means that the future of the Academy and VBD is uncertain, and we have no choice but to ask for your support in order to help make sure that the Academy and Vision by Design survives. We have several benefits for donors, including getting a shout out right here on the Corrected View podcast. So go to orthokeratologist.com, click on the practitioner button to donate and help preserve the Academy and Vision by Design. And finally, please only give if it in no way brings you harm. We understand that these are difficult times, which makes asking for your support that much more difficult, considering not everyone is able to do so. Thank you, and now on to the episode. Welcome back to The Corrected View. I have with us today Dr. Paul Levine, President of the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. Paul, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Always fun to do these with you.
And our guest for this episode is Dr. Ken Mahler, one of the leading designers in the Wave universe. Ken, welcome to the Corrected View podcast.
Hi, Matt, and thanks for having me on tonight. I'm looking forward to a lively conversation here.
Great. And so what we wanted to have you on was we wanted to talk about the Pentacam, the Oculus device that you're using and how you're using it. So if you could give us a little bit of a preliminary overview of the Pentacam and then describe what you've been doing with it.
Okay, well, I put the Pentacam in about 2.5 years ago, and I've had a really, really nice experience utilizing the Pentacam in the practice on a couple of very disparate, different levels. First, I primarily bought the Pentacam as an adjunct to help out with scleral lens fitting because of the scleral profiling software that had been developed. It was actually in beta form when I had purchased the device, and that was to help that out. But as you already know, the Pentacam also provides topographical and tomographical data of the cornea, and that has really been an incredible add-on to be able to get extensive metrics about corneas that are really not obtainable through any other means. Being able to see corneas in such detail has allowed me much better analyses to follow, as well as even diagnose earlier keratoconics. But it also gives insight to some of the real nuanced structural differences that you'll see behind corneas, as well as inside the actual material of the cornea, where sometimes you might want to qualify or even quantify how dense a scar is. And the Pentacam gives you the ability to do that, as well as even follow it through time and to see if there's any progression to any of the opacification of that. So it's been a real joy having it in the practice. It's allowed a much better following of my orthokeratology patients, and directly for the input to the Wave software, where I can design directly from the data that the Pentacam is supplying. It's been absolutely invaluable for both corneal, scleral, and of course orthokeratology lenses. So the Pentacam has been a true joy in having in the practice. One of the a few very exciting things that I've been able to see change dramatically how I've practiced over the last 2.5 years.
I'd like to ask Ken, first of all, what is the diameter of data that you get topographically with the Pentacam?
Topographically, you really do get out to the limbus. It really does measure where your placido disc-based topography systems really start to fall short somewhere around the chord of anywhere between 8.5 and 10 millimeters, because of the actual corneal steepness may limit you down to a smaller, 8.5 millimeter button, or if you can get a really good coverage, maybe out to 9.5 or 10 millimeters. But the Pentacam actually gives you data much past that and right out to the limbus, as well as a reference best fit sphere, so you can really appreciate elevation differences pretty much out to the limbus. And then you'll go ahead and if you add in the CSP software, which is the corneal scleral profiling software, you're getting data that's really all the way out to consistently 16.5 millimeters, but I've gotten as far as 18 millimeters if you really have a good orbital structure that allows you to get the lids way out of the way, and a very cooperative patient that makes it easy to get a large diameter scan. So yeah, that's, again, since the typical wave lenses I would design would have even on the cornea, have data that I'm trying to reference out past where the placido disc data would end. Pentacam's actually been a nice add-on to be able to have that data and really nail down these edge profiles much better, even on the corneal lenses.
So you are no longer needing to extrapolate that peripheral corneal data?
No, extrapolation really isn't necessary for the cornea at all.
So that really how has that changed your design philosophy? When you sit down at your computer to design a Wave Ortho-k lens, for instance, has this changed your entire approach to that? You're not guessing at all anymore. The data's there for you.
Yeah, that's correct, Paul. And that's why I'm saying it really has been an incredible adjunct to what I was doing before. Now, as far as changing totally, I wouldn't say that I've changed totally what I'm doing. I would say more in incremental nuance changes. Things have subtly changed over the last 2.5 years in terms of designing, just because what I was doing before was working well. It's now I just have real data versus extrapolated data, and obviously it's always better to have the real data to go from.
Are you still using your Scout?
It's interesting you ask about the Scout. When I purchased the Pentacam, my original intention was to retire the Scout. He's been a tried and true trooper for 20 years, and he's done a great job of really allowing me to take lens design where nothing else has been even close. And so I was really going to retire the Scout. However, due to logistics in the office, the scout sits in the room with the patient, the Pentacam is down the hall in another room. I actually still find it very easy and less time consuming to still take scout topographies when I'm not really interested or needing the data that's supplied by the Pentacam that's out, whether it's the topographical data out at the edge of the cornea or the corneoscleral data that's way out there. But if I'm, for example, doing follow-up on an orthokeratology patient, I don't typically take the patient from the room, take them down the hall for the Pentacam scan when the scout is sitting right there. So the scout really hadn't gotten retired like I was planning to do, but I would also add in, if the scout died tomorrow, I would not replace it. I would just go ahead and follow it all up with the Pentacam.
I have a few more questions about this before I hand it back over to Matt. It's so interesting and so fascinating. So if you have a patient that you designed a lens on, be it a corneal GP, Ortho-k, whatever the case is, and you used your topography data from your scout, I don't know, say a year or two ago, or in this case, more like 3 or 4 years ago, and just, you're not super in love with maybe the way that lens is fitting anymore, and you want to refit that patient, are you going to completely wash them out and then rescan them with the Pentacam and then sort of start over again? Or I mean, I'm sure it's not an absolute decision. Every case is different, but can you explain that process a little bit?
Well, certainly the whole process of washing patients out to get raw data to redesign a wave lens from is something that I came to terms with between 15 and 20 years ago, because I had so many patients in other orthokeratology lens designs at that point. Now that they're in wave designs, it's actually easier for me, and I don't think I really need to necessarily wash them out, but I would go ahead and sort of meld my old scout data with the Pentacam data. Now, one thing I didn't point out, and this is huge, and I think it's probably the single greatest advantage that looks so unimportant until you really delve into it, is that the Pentacam measures all of its data tear film independent. So since it's tear film independent, it doesn't require any reflective data whatsoever. When you have these compromised tear films on the surface of the cornea, which is by far, I think, the single number one reason why people will get into trouble using placido disc-based topographies to design wave lenses, is they'll get bad data because of poor tear films. This really doesn't enter into it any longer. Now, interestingly, I just had a truly fascinating orthokeratology case just about 6 months ago where, and it goes exactly to the question you just asked about, I really wasn't happy, and would I go ahead and wash them out and go ahead and just get Pentacam data and just design from there. The case was a really interesting case because he was a first responder, and I've had this particular fellow in a wave Ortho-k lens for about 15 years, and he's done absolutely stellar. He's had no problems whatsoever up until the last couple of years. When he became a first responder and he's working for fire rescue, his sleep pattern had become rather erratic because he's on for 24 hours. And so what he would do is he would put his Ortho-k lenses on, and then a call would come in, it would wake him up, and he wouldn't have time to take the lenses off. He would wear the lenses to the call. Well, being that it was open eye wearing out to the call before he would come back, I watched as his treatment topographies just went right down the tubes. Now, interestingly, his acuity didn't get too bad. It went from 2015 and it dropped down to about 2025. So he was still very functional, but he was coming in, and I was looking at these topographies that just looked awful because of this erratic sleep and then being woken pattern and wearing the lenses out to the call. And so I ended up taking the original design. He'd been in this design now for, about 15 years, went ahead and did Pentacam on his already treated corneas, and then went ahead and redesigned a larger diameter lens utilizing the corneoscleral data from the Pentacam and melding that together with the scout topography data that had gone to designing up his original lens for all of those years. By coming up with the two of those together, first shot out, I ended up hitting a home run with that, and I got him right back on track again, being able to wear his lens out onto the call without it being pushed around and altering his treatment. So
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that goes directly to answering your question. I don't think it's really necessary because they're already in a wave design. I can utilize the previous wave data and sort of bring that into and match it up with the Pentacam data that I'm now collecting now.
So you can import an already designed lens that was used with a different topographer and open it up in the Pentacam wave software?
No, the Pentacam exports the data out just like the Scout or the Medmont or the Piccolo or even the Keratograph 5M. So it exports it out to Wave. But once I have it in Wave, you now have a Wave lens from the exported Pentacam data against a Wave lens that had been designed with Scout data. And so you can match them up. It's not really an automated process, but you can manually sort of do a workaround there to be able to create an equivalency so that I didn't necessarily need to wash them out.
Cool. And when you use the CSP function, does the patient, they have to look in different positions of gaze? Is it a mosaic?
No and yes. The patient does not need to look in different gazes. The way the Pentacam CSP software works is that the fixation target within the Pentacam hardware is identical for the patient. So they fixate the same target for the 5 scans that go to create the CSP melded data. The Pentacam actually decenters what it's doing with the data and then puts that all together into, as you said, a mosaic. So it is able to essentially create a composite single mapping of all of the 5 scans, even though the patient is still fixating the same exact target.
So it reduces the parallax or things that sometimes happen when you move off of, primary gaze.
That's correct. And it's also very exact, because if you are trying to have them look off axis, you may not be able to exactly control exactly how off axis they really are. Is it 1 degree? Is it 1.5 degrees? Is it 2 degrees? Whereas this case, they're just still fixating the exact same target.
Very cool.
So bringing it back to the uninitiated, I guess, given what you said about the Scout and getting the sense that the Pentacam is not your typical standard for wave fitting, how did you get inspired to use it? And is it something that other fitters should seriously consider in their practice?
Well, as far as should other fitters get involved, it really would depend on the spectrum of patients that they're looking to take care of. If it's solely for orthokeratology, for myopia control, for example, I think pause needs to be given in that it's really, really important to be able to get total metrics of a cornea. And I was just in a conversation with a colleague of mine a couple of weeks ago, and we were pointing out the fact that the typical patient that we're looking at for myopia control is in roughly the exact same demographic that you would be diagnosing early keratoconus. And so if you don't want to possibly end up missing keratoconus and putting that young child into orthokeratology only to find out that things kind of go off the rails because there's an underlying disease process that was just a little bit too subtle to identify prior to starting Ortho-k, the Pentacam is incredibly good at identifying that. And it's interesting, I just had a case like this about 9 months ago where, again, I had a 17-year-old, which is typically well past where we would think the first signs of keratoconus should be showing up on the anterior cornea, and I had put her into orthokeratology only to find out that things got a little strange in her early 30s. And sure enough, when I ran her on the Pentacam, you could easily see that her cornea absolutely meets the criteria for keratoconus. So here it was a little too subtle to pick up. Even at 17, she did well for over 10 years in Ortho-k, and then all of a sudden started developing problems because she truly was actually an underlying keratoconic. So I think if you see enough orthokeratology for the kids demographic of, let's say, 10 to 15-year-olds, which I think is kind of almost like a meat and potatoes area where we're going to see a lot of myopia control implemented, it really would be important to see if, in fact, there's some underlying keratoconus or some other underlying disease that may be a reason not to put them into orthokeratology and consider maybe something else for myopia control. So from that standpoint, I think the Pentacam is invaluable. Necessary? I don't know that it's necessary, but it certainly would be very, very nice. Now, as far as a topographer goes, I think it's absolutely stellar. And again, if for no other reason, other than the fact that it's not sensitive to tear film problems, that alone makes this a huge asset to be doing Ortho-k. Now, if you in fact take care of kids and you're interested in a corneal disease such as keratoconus, I think the Pentacam becomes more invaluable at that point. So at that stage, I think that's a welcome addition to the practice. And back when the CSP software was added in, I, from my practice, had been trying to justify the cost of the Pentacam for exactly the above-mentioned conditions I was just talking about. And it was really a tough one for me to justify. As soon as the CSP software was added into the Pentacam package, and I was now able to take my scleral lens fitting light years ahead of where it had been previously, in essence being able to nail down a first lens empirically by fit, that was just a no-brainer from my standpoint. And if in fact you're doing scleral lenses, I think that this becomes an invaluable tool to have the scleral lens mapping done for that. So I think it really comes down to the breakdown of the practice. If you're just doing orthokeratology, it would be nice, but I don't know that it's necessary. If you're doing orthokeratology and you have a fairly high percentage of kids and you're concerned about corneal disease such as keratoconus, I think it does become a little bit more necessary. And then if you're looking at scleral lens fitting in the practice, I think it becomes almost mandatory because you can just do such a better job, quicker, more efficiently, and ultimately ending up with a better product for that particular patient.
Excellent. Excellent.
I want to ask a couple of questions just about with the scleral lenses. So, Ken, are you specifically designing all of your scleral lenses with Wave and the Pentacam, or do you use other products? Do you do any kind of off-the-shelf empirical fittings or anything like that?
Well, in response to our pandemic, I think we're going to see a much larger shift towards empirical fitting, and docs are really going to be trying to get away, I think, from diagnostic fitting, both from a practical standpoint as well as a fear standpoint, that we don't want to see anyone have the fear in their eye that possibly they may become infected through reuse of diagnostic lenses, even though they're properly disinfected and the like. Patients still may have that fear. Just justified or not, it may still be there. But from a doctor's standpoint, it certainly becomes a much more burdensome chore to make certain that proper disinfection systems are being employed in the office so that diagnostic lenses can be reutilized, whereas empirical fitting doesn't require any of that. So I think there's going to be a big move toward empirical fitting, and I think that the current pandemic of COVID-19 has just sort of hastened things along a little bit, that I think more docs are going to be more interested in that type of thing quicker than they would have otherwise. Now, as far as the choices of fitting I'm doing, as soon as I was able to add the CSP software into my Wave scleral lens fitting, this became a no-brainer for me. This elevated that practice so much. It was almost like, wow, I can't believe another first lens looks perfect on that eye. And that's a huge change from where things had been prior, where I had to extrapolate scleral shape data from corneal topographical data and try and put that into a lens design, and then go ahead and then troubleshoot from the slit lamp to try and get that lens to land better. So I think from that standpoint, that really was a no-brainer, and it really has proven over the past 2.5 years to be absolutely fantastic in achieving the goal much faster, as well as achieving a better goal ultimately. I've had several patients who were doing well in previously designed scleral lenses that I had done with Wave, only to go ahead and refit them with the Pentacam CSP elevation data, and they've even commented that, wow, this is even better than you had me doing before. So ultimately, we're actually even able to get a better product manufactured for these patients. Now, as far as utilizing other products, there actually are a couple of other products that are on the market that can utilize the scleral data that the Pentacam can supply, including even some of the not necessarily very asymmetric designs that are out there, but some of the toric designs or even some of the quadrant-specific designs, the data that's output from the Pentacam can certainly be utilized to choose those lenses and fit those more efficiently as well. I do not do any of those now, although I am looking at doing some other empirical fitting with a couple of other lens designs that are out there, and I believe more are going to come to market as we see the next couple of years unfold.
Hey listeners, real quick, I'd like to talk about the AAOMC's new free base membership and how it can help. Base membership is our introductory membership plan that will give you access to the AAOMC's private community of top fitters and experts who are waiting for your questions, input, and expertise. You'll also get access to the AAOMC's brand new educational library of video presentations, which is currently right now being created by our members for our members to help you learn along your journey towards a specialty practice. Also, base members get access to our quarterly newsletters, special events and webinars reserved for members, and when you're ready, you can upgrade your base membership to a standard membership for even more benefits, such as practice listings on our practitioner search, product discounts, fellowship, and special access to AAOMC events like Vision by Design. Best of all, base membership is free. So what do you have to lose? Go to orthokeratologist.com, click on the practitioner button, and join us. Join the war against the myopia epidemic.
I want to go back in time a little bit. I'd like you to, if you wouldn't mind, maybe talking a little bit about the fact that you do have a specialty-only practice. I think it would be nice to maybe hear a little bit about how one goes about doing something like that, and making that decision not to do, primary care plus specialty care.
Well, I certainly don't have any of the laundry list of answers to that question. I can only tell you my experience in how I got to where I am, doing only really specialty care. And I will see the odd primary care patient, but they really are very, very far and few between. The specialty care sort of envelope that I exist in was really driven by my love and passion for dealing with the irregular cornea, the very complex optics that come along with that, and really trying to restore back normalcy to patients' lives that have really been derailed by what was going on the cornea, whether it was from diseases like keratoconus and pellucids and terians and a whole host of others, corneal ulcers from infectious sequelae, whether it's a Pseudomonas ulcer or even a herpetic ulcer that left the cornea very irregular and, of course, the vision very, very distorted. Post-transplant patients, whatever they were transplanted for, and, of course, the refractive surgical patients who have had less than stellar results, and sometimes results even that are bordering on horrifying in terms of how irregular their corneas are and how distorted their vision has become because of the fact that they're no longer capable of being corrected through any other means other than a very complex contact lens. And so that was really kind of how I ended up down the path that I ended up, and doing what I'm doing. And of course, I couldn't be any happier where I am because I'm doing exactly what I love doing, which is giving people back their lives through very complex contact lenses. Now, as far as anyone that would be interested in adding more of that to their practice, I'm not saying they have to go cold turkey on everything else, but adding more of that to their practice, the bottom line is conviction. You really have to make the conviction that you are going to do the work that's necessary to develop the skills to be able to deliver this type of care. This type of care has a lot of one-offs. You can't follow rules or fitting guides or, it worked before, so it should work again, because a lot of these corneas come in and they really do present very unique types of problems, and they really do require a lot of out-of-the-box thinking sometimes, because you just can't fall back to that default, well, this worked before, so I'll do it again. Scleral lenses have made some of that a little bit easier because you're not necessarily dealing directly with the cornea, but scleral lenses come with their own baggage of problems to manage that don't really apply to corneal lenses. And so they're not necessarily the panacea, but they have made that a little bit simpler to deal with very, very irregular corneas. But I think it's important to understand that there's no one single solution that solves everything. And you're going to go ahead and sort of study the irregular cornea for a weekend and master 1, 2, or 3 different types of scleral lenses and be able to take care of this population of patients. It just doesn't work that way. You really need to understand the diseases that are being managed or the corneas that are being managed underneath. And then you need to be able to apply the knowledge, wisdom, and experience that you slowly are getting in terms of contact lens design to be able to employ these things to these very, very specific and unique situations that come along with all of these specific types of scenarios that present.
For those of you listening that don't know, I mean, Ken can read a cornea probably without a topographer better than most of us can with. So he's a man to listen to when he talks about this stuff. So do heed his advice.
Yeah, and
Ken
is one of the leading designers in the Wave universe. Who were your mentors?
Oh, I wish I had some mentors that could have helped me out. But to those of us who were in the early days of Wave, and I believe, Paul, you were one of those. I think you can attest to, there wasn't a lot of guidance out there. We were basically given a piece of software that said, this software will allow you to talk to a lathe, and you can tell the lathe to make what you want, and good luck with that. And that was about the extent of the help and support that was out there for us. And I'll never forget the very, very first Wave lens that I ever did. We're going back 20 years now. I remember I had a very successful gas perm practice already, and I was already designing as complex a lens as I could by manually calling parameters into a laboratory to have that manufactured. And I remember a patient came in, and this was just a standard single vision lens. This was nothing exotic. And I remembered sitting down and writing down all my parameters that I was going to call in for this particular patient. And it took me about 10 minutes to write up the parameter list that I was going to order for this patient. And then I had my newly installed Wave software on my computer. I said, let me get to work on seeing how this translates to making a Wave lens. And I go ahead and I designed up that lens. And I will tell you that my 10 minutes for the pair of lenses that I did manually was another 4 hours with the Wave software to try and get 2 lenses designed. And I still wasn't even certain after 4 hours that I actually had something that was even going to work. But with trepidation, I clicked the order button. I ordered in the pair of lenses. I got that on that patient, and they were awful. They were just terrible. I couldn't believe how much I made a mess of what I thought was really good. And so, unlike a lot of my Wave suffering colleagues out there who were stymied by this type of thing, I sat there in great detail at the slit lamp and took notes of everything that I did wrong with that lens design. And then I went back to the computer and tried to fix all of those mistakes. And I went ahead and redesigned a pair of lenses. And the next pair of lenses was still bad, but they were less bad than that first pair. And I was, at that point, hooked on Wave because I was able to start seeing what I could do on the computer screen with this software and being able to talk to a lathe to make what I wanted, and then see how that translated onto the actual lens that was on their eye, and how those changes would be implemented and what impact they would have. And from that point, I continued to grow my philosophy of Wave so that I can actually make what I wanted. And to the point now where 10 minutes, even on some of the most complicated corneas, is still about what it would take me to design up a very, very nice corneal gas permeable lens on Wave, even if the cornea is an absolute travesty at this point. And so it's taken a lot of years, it's taken a lot of hours, it's taken a lot of experimentation, and it's taken a lot of determination. And I think that that's really the hallmark of any of the Wave docs out there. And Paul, you're amongst those that I think would agree that, Wave isn't for the lighthearted. They really have to commit and consistently work with the software to develop the skills. And it does not happen overnight, or even over a weekend, or even over a week. It happens over a lot of time spent with the software, being able to really design and elevate the skill set so that you can really sort of deliver on what needs to be done for the specific case.
So persistence and learning from your mistakes. And what else? What's another thing that you think is shaped the evolution of your designs?
Absolutely, the studies that have come out there, because being that I have a essentially restricted specialty lens practice and everything cornea and sclera is really the focus of my entire professional existence, it gives me the luxury of really being able to scour every study that comes out. For example, what we're learning about scleral shape and how that has evolved really over the last 10 years. Before we had, scleral mapping technology like the Pentacam, what did we know about scleral shape and landing lenses out there? And so being able to study, the data that comes out and then go ahead and implement that into design philosophy, that absolutely continues to shape what I do even today. Interestingly, I was just reading it was a study in the last, I think, 2 or 3 months that just came out showing that scleral shape might actually be linked to a predictive value for who's going to progress in myopia. Now imagine that, in our world of myopia control, if we were to go ahead back to the child and we map out their sclera, which we wouldn't think is relevant, think that may even be superfluous, but we take a look at that and we now have a nomogram set up with certain scleral shapes, and this child falls into this sort of, in quotes, high risk myopic progressive category, we might be a little bit more aggressive, even though they haven't necessarily progressed much in the last year. We might want to watch them a little more closely. So this was a study just released in the last couple of months. I was just reading that earlier today, that obviously this needs to be examined further, but imagine having that as one of your diagnostic tools. And again, that might be fed in directly from the Pentacam CSP data that you might not have even thought was important to do, yet it may in fact be. So this absolutely shapes design and it shapes clinical decision making. And I've had the fortunate luxury to be able to continue to incorporate all of the latest and greatest that comes out in our collective wisdom from the studies that are done and be able to apply that clinically to the aid of my patients.
If Paul described you as someone, with that magic eye, do you see something different than the rest of us when you sit down to design a lens?
I absolutely do, and I know that from my consulting work. I've worked with a lot of docs who are fairly experienced fitters, and even many of them in a subset are experienced wave fitters. And I will work with them on a design because we're trying to get them more efficient or be able to see things differently. And commonly, I will look at the topography and comment and make some changes, and invariably the doc will say, wait, hold on a second. How do you know that you have to change this? And how do you know that you have to change it by this much? And I said, well, it's staring right there on the topography, and they're not seeing it. So I do know to some degree that is true, that I do see things a little bit differently. And where that comes from is I absolutely think that's just a matter of numbers. It's just how many topographies I continue to look at and how many corneas I get to examine thoroughly. And now even with more Pentacam data, even in more depth than I was able to see before, because it's not just the surface, but it's through and through the cornea, even to the back surface of the cornea. And so I'm starting to really sort of develop an eye, if you will, for picking up nuanced changes that are on the back surface of corneas, which anyone who's doing anterior surface placido disc-based topography, that's a total unknown. They don't even see any of that data. So I think that really is a matter of practice and the amount of time that I've devoted to reading all of this data.
So with the inclusion of the Pentacam, then where do you see this going? Like, what is the ultimate potential with what you're going to be able to do as you use the Pentacam more and more?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think it allows me a much better diagnostic tool to evaluate what kind of a cornea am I dealing with before I do anything to it. Whether I fit a single vision lens on it, a scleral lens on it, or do orthokeratology with that cornea, I have a better understanding of what's really happening with that cornea. And so that makes me a better diagnostician, as well as being able to apply more clinical wisdom to that particular patient's care. So I see that as number one and foremost. Now, beyond that, it absolutely has already evolved my ability to design the lenses more efficiently and to a better endpoint than I was able to do before. So again, efficiency is important for everybody. Everyone's time is valuable. Both doctors and patients' time is valuable. And we all want to be efficient. We don't want patients coming back for their 47th visit because we haven't figured out what their problem is. It'll be much better if we can nail things down in the first or second visit. And so I think that the Pentacam moving forward will continue to evolve and improve my ability to get to the endpoint faster, as well as a better endpoint ultimately. So I think that that's going to be important. Now, this technology of scleral lens mapping, that's still relatively in its infancy. So it's going to be interesting to see where that continues to develop over the next few years. And I don't know really where the predictors for that are going to play out clinically. It's hard to imagine where that's going to go because I don't really know what technology is going to come out to evolve, allowing us maybe more information about the scleral data directly. But it'll be interesting to see where that takes us. But obviously, the continued evolution, both in lens design and being the ability to be able to take actual measured data and apply that to lens design, that's a huge step forward. You know, I was just talking with someone earlier today about how do you expect to build a house with either poor or no survey data? You need to understand the land that you're building on, and in terms of the cornea or the sclera for cornea, or corneoscleral or even scleral design lenses, you really need to know what surfaces you're dealing with, as well as what makes up the intricacies of the underlying structures of those surfaces, whether or not we're dealing with an overtly thin cornea or possibly a diseased cornea or possibly even an irregularity on the back surface of the cornea that isn't necessarily keratoconus but might plague you in terms of vision performance. So I think that's really where the value for these types of technologies are today and where their continued evolution is going to push us forward.
Great. Paul, anything to add?
Well, yeah, you asked Ken who his mentors were. I mean, but Ken was one of my mentors.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes, I've been playing with Wave for a long time. I didn't even start with Wave until there were only 8 semi-meridians to deal with. You had 24, I think, at one point.
Yes, I did, and quite honestly, I still missed the 24.
So yeah, I mean, I just want to thank you, for all that you've done for me personally, and for our entire academy, for that matter, and for the Wave universe.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been my professional joy.
Yeah, and I also would like to echo the same sentiment. Thank you. And so let me ask you this, and whatever response you want to give me is fine, but is the future of Ortho-k in this kind of design software with Wave and OrthoTool, iSpace? Like, are we going to see an era where this is what Ortho-k is? It's all custom designed lens?
Matt, I really do think that we're going to see a move away from diagnostic fitting, and included in that is Ortho-k. I think all lenses are going to really move more into the software empirical universe, and technologies like Wave, and you mentioned OrthoTools and iSpace. The people who have already been designing lenses with these software-driven platforms already can appreciate the incredible leap forward and elevated value that this type of design brings to the table in being able to deliver a better result and a better and more efficient result to patients. And so where a case might have failed through diagnostic fitting for Ortho-k in the past, you come along with a software-driven platform like Wave and being able to make a much more complex and more custom design for that particular cornea, and you bring the case to success. And I certainly have had my share of those types of cases over the years where more standardized types of Ortho-k lenses were fit. The patient never got uncorrected vision better than 20/30 or 20/40. They were uncomfortable. They didn't function well. It didn't last long. And I come along and design up a Wave lens that's custom for that particular cornea, and all of a sudden they achieve 20/15 acuity. The lens is very comfortable. It's slanting all day long. And it's like, well, this Ortho-k has nothing to do with what I did before. So I really do believe that these software-driven platforms, and currently they're limited. There aren't really that many, but I think that those are really going to be popping up much, much more so as we move forward. And like I said, getting away from diagnostic fitting really does simplify things in the office as far as sterilization procedures for diagnostic lenses. That does add a burden to the office to be able to, take whatever diagnostic lenses and run them through disinfection processes to make certain that they're safe to be reutilized on other patients. So, on one hand, you have the diagnostic fitting, which is time consuming, not necessarily a pleasant experience for the patient because they're having several lenses put on their eye, during a visit, none of which that necessarily work very well. And then the burden on the doctor, where they have to go through these disinfection protocols to make sure that lenses are then disinfected and measured and restored properly so that they're safe to be utilized again. And then ultimately deliver a less than possible result that is capable through empirical fitting with the software. So I think for a lot of reasons, I think the software is really going to take things over for empirical fitting as we move forward. I think COVID-19 is going to make this more apparent quicker, and I think we're going to see more doctors kind of jumping ship from diagnostic fitting to empirical fitting quicker than they otherwise would have. And I really do think ultimately that's going to benefit the patients because they're getting a better product in the end that delivers better results, whether it's an orthokeratology result or even a scleral lens for single vision or a multifocal or whatever the lens is being fit for. So yeah, I do think that that's going to largely replace the diagnostic fitting that a lot of docs have relied on up until this point in time. And devices like the Pentacam certainly allow this. And then the software platforms you mentioned in the Ortho-k arena, Wave has an incredible advantage because it's an incredibly mature program. It's had 20 years of development and refinements to be able to make it work and work well. And iSpace has come a long way since its original inception, and the even Ortho Tools as well. That's continued to evolve and grow. And so, these platforms really do give the users a very important leg up, I think, in delivering a better result and in a better way. So yeah, I do think that we're going to see the demise of diagnostic fitting. Maybe not in a year or two, but eventually.
Okay, so given what you just said, and I tell Carrie this all the time, but you guys come from what I call the pioneer pedigree, the Captain Kirk kind of generation when it comes to myopia control, where I hear more all the time stories from you guys about how you just made it work, figured it out, trial and error. There wasn't really a lot. There were mentors in some circumstances, and in other cases there weren't. We got a new generation of fitters. We have new problems that they face, new circumstances. Some are not the most willing to put that same foot forward to get into something like Wave, for instance. So my question for both of you, I'll have Paul go first. What advice, because you're both Wave fitters, obviously. So what kind of advice can you pass along to a fitter who, maybe they've, done some cases, they're thinking about doing more and they're thinking about getting into Wave, and how do they take that first step? What is a piece of advice, Paul, that you could give someone who is looking to try out something like Wave or Ortho-Tool or iSpace?
Well, I think Ken actually gave, you already gave the word. It's commitment. You have to commit. And so when you decide, I'm going to learn this system, then you have to commit to learning that system. You can't just sort of poke around it and see if something sticks. You've got to really make a mental decision, and you have to be willing to understand that mistakes that you make, which could end up costing you money out of pocket in redos and new lenses, is really the cost of education. And when you put in that kind of effort and when you make that mental commitment, Ken is right, you ultimately get to the point where you can sit down with the most complicated looking eyeball and be done with your designing in 5 or 10 minutes because you understand how it works and you know the nuances and you've worked through it all. So I think it's really perseverance and commitment.
And Ken, is there, same kind of question, is there a piece of advice? Is there any kind of system in place to help someone new, get their footing and start working with Wave? And do you have any advice for someone who's looking to get invested into it?
Absolutely. By all means, get invested into it. It's great. as is evidenced by my professional career with Wave. I think it really delivers where currently there's nothing else on the market that can deliver the same type of product. So I would say, by all means, go ahead and resign yourself to the fact that the commitment is necessary. Paul just said it, and I agree wholeheartedly, that the mistakes that you will make are basically school dues. That's where you're paying your dues to learn what you need to do to make this work and work better. And it's almost a necessary evil. I don't know anyone that got up on a two-wheel bike, pedaled, and just rode away after they had training wheels. And they fell down several times before they got the hang of that. And Wave is no different than that. I really likened Wave over the years to an art form, because being able to design these lenses truly is an art form, and it requires a certain engineering and mathematical approach, but you really need almost like an artist's eye. And I would argue that, save a couple of really bizarre exceptions through the history of mankind, no one came out painting pictures like Leonardo da Vinci with the pickup of a brush and some paints. It took a lot of development in terms of skill and dedication and commitment to learning the underlying principles that make it all work. And then after you've put in that time and effort, then we could start talking about how do we actually make a lens that really is going to do what it needs to do. And so there's just really no shortcut. Now, I can tell you, I have been in talks with Oculus, and I do know I am involved with developing some of the Wave training that is going to be coming out over the next several months to probably a year or two, to try and get new docs that are coming along into Wave at least the foundation, so that they have some idea what we're talking about. That's not going to make them an expert, but at least we're all talking the same language. Now, what's ended up happening for a lot of the docs out there, and Paul was certainly one of them, is that many docs have taken the extra leap and have come and worked with me to learn more about Wave. The training that I offer is through several different methodologies, and the reason for that is that people coming into Wave have very different skill sets that they've already developed. The person who's been fitting gas permeable corneal lenses for 25 years is very different than the person who graduated school 2 years ago. Yet both of those may be new to Wave, and they need to be approached very, very differently in terms of what do they need to be taught. Past that, we also have doctors with very different agendas and goal sets for their practice. For example, you may have a doc who looks at Wave who says, this is my ultimate Ortho-k tool, and I want to learn everything about this so I can make great orthokeratology lenses. Whereas you may have another doc who wants to use much more of what Wave allows you to do and be able to create incredible scleral lenses and multifocal corneal lenses and fit really very irregular corneas, and maybe not even do Ortho-k. Wave is applicable to that doctor as well, but that doctor clearly has a very different agenda. You also have some doctors who really just don't want to devote the necessary time, and that's really problematic, because there's no way that they can go ahead and really become proficient at utilizing this type of technology. For some of those docs, I end up doing cases for them, and they're perfectly happy with that as well. They've added on the capabilities of Wave within their practice without necessarily having to learn what they needed to do to make it work. So I offer a lot of different consultation avenues for the docs that are out there, and I've been doing that for more than 15 years now. So I do know what works, and I do know what gets people up and running in Wave. And like I said, I do know that Oculus has coming out really a much more refined and better process to at least give a foundational view of what Wave is all about and how it can be utilized. And that's going to be coming out in the near future. So that's certainly enough to get people at least up and running. We'll just have to wait for that to be implemented. And that will be a welcome addition to what has been around really for the past several years.
All right. Well, this has been a fantastic episode. And Ken, thank you so much for joining us. And if anyone wants to get in contact with you, where can people find out more about you on the internet?
They can go to my website at noblur.com. That's NOBLUR.com with no spaces. And From the website, there's many ways to contact me, as well as see what's possible with WAVE and scleral lenses and Ortho-k and everything else that we've talked about today. And they can certainly get in touch with me there, even for consultation services. That's also up on the website as well. If they want to just email me, they email me at Dr. Mahler, that's DRMALLER, at Nobler.com, NOBLUR. And again, no spaces for that as well.
Awesome. And Paul, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I'm always glad to have you guys on with me to talk shop with our guests. And if anyone's interested in finding out more about you on the internet, where should they go?
Well, my website is greatvisioncare.com. And if you want to reach me by email, I have a couple of different email addresses. Probably the easiest one is plevinod@gmail.com.
And this episode of the Corrected View podcast is brought to you by the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. It is definitely a tight-knit group of myopia control specialists like Ken and Paul. And if myopia control and Ortho-k are things that you're interested in, you have a passion for like these guys, you should definitely join us and become a member. And you can find out more information about that at orthokeratologist.com. Ken, Paul, thank you so much once again for coming on the program.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you
and thanks, Ken.
So much. Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Matt. Paul, thanks for everything you do for the Academy, as well as you, Matt. I think this really was a great talk, and I was very happy to be a participant and bestow whatever knowledge I can give to our listeners.
Well, that's it for this episode of The Corrected View. Remember that this is a community-based podcast, so it's not my opinions about myopia control that are the ones that count, but yours. So let us know what you think by emailing the podcast at thecorrectedview@gmail.com.